Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Prophecy in the News. I'm Gary Stearman, and today we're going to be talking about our recent prophecy conference. We called it the Prophecy Summit at Branson 2012. The final prophecies are here. You'll want to hear what we have to say today. Well, welcome to Prophecy in the News, and in studio with me is our Operations Director, Bob Ulrich. Hi, Bob.
It's good to be here with you today. And
we've had an exciting time. We are back and getting our feet on the ground again after the summit at Branson 2012. In my mind, Bob, one of the best prophecy conferences ever held, and the people who attended were just lavish in their praise.
Well, I'm still kind of up on cloud nine. It was a lot of work. A tremendous amount of effort went into the planning and the execution of the conference, but it was all worthwhile when we got there and we saw the excitement level of some of the people who, you know, in your normal church today, there's not a lot of people interested in studying Bible prophecy and the things that are going to happen in the future. And today we're here to tell you about some of those things that are happening as we speak. They're in the news every day. I mean, the Bible is true. The things predicted, prophesied over 2,500 years ago are on the front page of our newspapers today.
And the amazing thing, and virtually everybody there just said the same thing, it's as though all of the speakers, and by the way, there are quite a few of them, we're going to talk about them in a moment, all of the speakers seem to have been drawing from the same well. There was a common thread, and I would have to characterize it as what we read in Matthew 24, 36 and 37, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. The days of Noah. You know, the days of Noah were not ordinary days, Bob. They were days when fallen angels descended to the earth and produced a mutant strain of humanity that had to be destroyed. And the Bible says that's all going to repeat again. Well, our speakers seem to be focusing around that single message, but in many, many different ways.
Well, there were some dark messages. There were some things that, trust me, you're never going to hear in church. Messages on the fallen angels, the Nephilim, as we call them. In fact, there were actually quite a few. I'd probably say 5 or 6 of the presentations. But you know, we had 26 speakers in Branson. Now, most prophecy conferences you go to, if you have 5 or 6 speakers, it's a lot. We had 26. So you can call this the biggest prophecy conference in history, and you'd probably be accurate. 65 messages, ranging on the upcoming wars that we believe are coming in Israel, to the messages on the Nephilim and the fallen angels, messages on Israel and the things that are happening both in the past prophetically and in the future. As we come up to, you know, these final headlines, we see it happening today in Syria.
And we had so many people with individual messages that were amazing. We're not going to have time to talk about them all, but for example, David Brennan, he's been in this studio a couple times, and he's written the Israel Omen and the Israel Omen 2. He was there and has an extremely interesting view of prophecy, which I think is just amazing.
He does. I mean, David's perspective is simple. He survived Hurricane Katrina. He's a New Orleans resident, and what happened in Katrina, David believes, was prophetic. It was the hand of God reacting to the efforts to divide the land of Israel. This is happening in our administration right now in Washington. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, I mean, this is their goal, to create this Palestinian state, and yet that's anti-God, isn't it?
The Israel Omen, and by the way, if you haven't read those books, we still have them and we still recommend them. David Brennan is a scholar and a gentleman, to use the old phrase, and he put on an amazing presentation. But Bob, that can be said of all the presentations.
Jonathan Cahn, the author of The Harbinger.
Who hasn't heard of Jonathan Cahn lately? Now, Jonathan Cahn has a New York Times bestseller called The Harbinger. You've probably heard about it. You've probably seen him interviewed on television. He spoke at Branson 2012, and he electrified the audience. You know, the thing about Jonathan Cahn, he is at the cutting edge of what's happening in Bible prophecy, and one of the ways you know that is because he's being criticized.
Yes, he is. I took him back to the airport at 3 o'clock in the morning on early Sunday morning, and we had an hour ride back to the airport, and he and I were able to discuss some of the issues and some of the criticism. But I just love the spirit of this man, how he responds to criticism. You know, we don't all respond well to being criticized. I know I personally don't. But yet he did it with a real spirit of love, and you can tell this man really loves the Lord. And his message, wow, when people walked out of that auditorium, they looked shell-shocked. I mean, it was that dynamic where you just wanted to jump for joy when you saw the things in the Bible that are happening today.
And again and again and again, people would walk up to me and say, Gary, you've got to do this again. This was on the first day. There are still 2 more days, and certainly we will do it again, but they were so excited they wanted to keep this thing going.
Gary, we probably had 700 or 800 people at the conference, jammed into this auditorium,
right,
jammed into breakout rooms. We had 4 speakers speaking at the same time. So not everybody got to hear all of the messages. Some of the rooms were overflowing. They were out in the hallway sitting on chairs. It was quite the phenomenon.
And we had Dr. Jerome Corsi and Joseph Farah. And if you follow WorldNet Daily at all, you know Joseph Farah, and you certainly know about Dr. Jerome Corsi. He's been right at the center of the great controversy. His presentation was very simple. It was based on the question, who is Barack Obama? And in the context of Bible study, Bible prophecy, he launched into, I suppose, a jaw-dropping presentation. I heard so many reports back on that one.
Well, I got to ride back from the airport with Joseph and with Jerome together, and there were a lot of things that I think I'm not going to say they were afraid to say publicly, but there's a lot going on right now, some of which you're going to hear in Jerome's message. When people walked out, I think they all had the education of their life.
Now, one of our distinctives at Prophecy in the News is that we do study premillennial, dispensational Bible prophecy. We believe in that eschatological approach. And within that sphere, there will be variations of opinion. Now, Joseph Farah represents one of those. His presentation was, will the Antichrist be Islamic? Not everybody agrees with that, but I was delighted to see him present his case for debate, and he came in that spirit. He said, you may not agree with me, but here it is, and I'm going to try to convince you that the Antichrist will be Islamic. And I must say, his presentation was phenomenal.
It really was. People have questions. It's a debate right now going on in theological circles that we felt it was important that that side be heard to compare it to the other side. And you know, Joseph was just incredibly gracious. We all know what a busy man he is. For him to take 3 days out of his schedule and come to Branson and be with us. And he did say to me at the end of the conference how much he enjoyed himself and how well planned and organized the conference was. And he was just absolutely fascinated by some of the speakers. In fact, I introduced Joseph to Steve Russell. Steve Russell is the man who actually captured Saddam Hussein. He spoke at the conference, and I didn't see the message, but you told me there wasn't a dry eye in the place.
That is the truth. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Russell was in charge of the troops that captured Saddam Hussein. And he started his presentation with statement of biblical prophecy and his own personal testimony of how, as a tough young kid, he was convinced that he did not need God, but something happened to him to change his mind. And that's when there wasn't a dry eye in the house. His personal testimony will bowl you over. And then he recounted what happened among the troops as Saddam Hussein was captured. And he related it from a godly perspective. It's not often you think of a lieutenant colonel in the Army being a very godly man, but Lieutenant Colonel Steve Russell is, and I'll tell you, that presentation has to be seen over and over again. Bob, when it's finally edited and we finally have that on DVD, you've got to watch it.
Well, I've seen him speak before, you know, but and I tell you, he is one dynamic speaker. His message may have been the highlight of the entire conference. It was just so moving.
It was.
Now, we had other people there. A guy by the name of Doug Hamp. Doug is a relative newcomer on the prophetic scene, but boy, he may have been the most popular speaker there. He delivered just 3 dynamite messages on the Nephilim, on the genetics of Christ's incarnation, and on the heavenly bodies that we're going to have one day. And I have to tell you, Doug Hamp is not just rehashing old material. He's creating his own new material on subjects that people find so fascinating. It was standing room only when he spoke. I wish we could have had him speak 6 times.
You know, Doug Hamp is a special guy. He has served as a pastor at a very famous church, Calvary Chapel, in Costa Mesa, California. A lot of people have heard about Calvary Chapel. But he also is a PhD in languages, in ancient languages, Greek and Hebrew. He has studied in Israel. He's a fluent Hebrew speaker, and he brings that knowledge into his presentations. He's written a book, which we offer here at Prophecy in the News, called Corrupting the Image, and his knowledge is phenomenal, Bob. He covers details that a lot of other people miss.
Well, you know, there's a lot of scientific experimentation going on today in laboratories across the world. In fact, when you actually study it, this is where all the federal funding is going. This is where all the money is flowing to this whole idea of changing man's DNA. I guess God didn't quite meet the high standards some of these scientists have. They want to improve the DNA of mankind. They want to improve our vision. They want to give us eyes like an eagle and God knows what else. But this is one of the things Doug spoke on, is this genetic manipulation going on. And boy, when you see it, you don't hear this in the mainstream press, do you?
Oh, no.
But when you see it and hear it preached like he preached it, it is a real eye-opener.
And documented as well. By the way, we're going to talk about our friend Tom Horn. But before that, I just want to say thanks to the Gilberts, Derek and Sharon. They had The View from the Bunker, internet radio. They were doing interviews. We don't have time to talk about everything they did, but I wanted to mention them and say thanks that they were there. It was phenomenal. A lot of people were sat in on those interviews.
Well, Derek Gilbert is a really fascinating guy. You know, his goal in life is to be a radio host or talk show host.
Yeah.
And when he interviewed you last year at the Future Congress Conference in Branson, you told me it was the best interview you'd ever had. I mean,
he did a great job.
These are one-on-one interviews with these authors, with these speakers from the conference. You just don't hear the heart of some of these people. I know Derek interviewed you.
He did, and by the way, we had a great rapport, and it was worth hearing again. In fact, I'm going to listen to it again myself when we have the final edition worked out on the Prophecy Conference. Now for our friend Tom Horn. We couldn't go very long without talking about him.
This conference wouldn't have been possible without Tom's expertise and guiding hand. He really helped behind the scenes just to steer me and to steer you in the right direction. And this was our first prophecy conference at Prophecy in the News on this scale. We've done smaller meetings throughout the country, but this was a big deal.
Well, Tom Horn, along with Chris Putnam, as you know, if you watch Prophecy in the News, has recently published a blockbuster. It's called Petrus Romanus, the Prophecy of the Final Pope. And it's making waves. Tom Horn is making waves. His presentation, I have to tell you, it was a highlight, and so was the presentation made by Chris Putnam. Did you get to see them both, Bob?
I didn't get to see hardly anything, Gary. I was busy shuttling around, making sure everybody was in place, doing their jobs. It was kind of a running joke at the conference that I was making, that I'm the guy that did all the air travel arrangements and the hotel arrangements, and the joke was Noah Hutchings and Larry Spargimino have no idea how close they came to sleeping in the same bed, because they stayed in the same room, and obviously they slept in 2 beds. Just look at the cover of this book, Petrus Romanus, and you can understand why this book is the blockbuster that it is. This is the #1 best-selling book in a single month in the history of Prophecy in the News. Brilliant cover design, and the message in here about some of the histrionics of the Catholic Church and the popes throughout history, and a future prophecy about the next pope. It really, really makes you stop and think.
And the documentation will blow you away. Chris Putnam, a master scholar and documentarian, proved point by point by point by point that the prophecy of the final pope is well documented, has been for 1,000 years, and it's all coming true on a clock-like precision schedule. Bob, the year 2012 has been named in Bible prophecy independently by dozens of Bible scholars over the centuries, and basically that was the theme of our meeting.
That was the theme of Tom Horn's message. You've seen his book, Apollyon Rising, 2012. This is what Tom preached on. Chris preached on Petrus Romanus. Tom preached on Apollyon in the year 2012, and both of them, you could have heard a pin drop during their presentations.
Things are happening, and interesting things are developing even in the publishing world. One of our guests, Dr. Ken Johnson. Now, Ken is a soft-spoken, quiet gentleman, a real scholar. We at Prophecy in the News value his books because people value his books. So many of you have ordered his books, and they have to do with the ancient church fathers, the ancient Bible prophecies, and when I say ancient, I'm talking about well-documented ancient historical and prophetic occurrences. He's got a gift for digging back into the dark corners of history and pulling up nuggets, and they're in his books. Bob, we sell a lot of his books.
His knowledge is just off the charts.
It is.
I mean, Ken is a very low-key guy, not superficial at all. He's written a whole, I think, 12, 13, 14 titles, on the apocryphal book of Barnabas, the book of Jasher, things that most people are not even aware of. But in those books are very interesting little tidbits that students of prophecy really find fascinating. Ken was a welcome and a very, very popular guest.
He was. Lots of people, bought his books. In fact, he complained to me. He said, I wish I had brought more of my books.
Well, I laughed when Ken told me what he was bringing. I said, Ken, that's a 10-minute supply. I mean, we brought probably 400 or 500 different titles that we had in the bookstore. Most of these people had never seen before. So it was an opportunity to have 700 or 800 people, like-minded, premillennial guests, to have access to all this material that is almost unheard of to find anywhere.
Now, Bob and I are recapping the Prophecy Summit at Branson 2012 to tell you what happened, how exciting it was, but in a few minutes we're going to also tell you how you can share in the experience, because we are editing together the best of Branson. I mean, it's going to be a wonderful set of DVDs. But on with our presenters.
Barry, could I interrupt for just a minute? It's not the best of. It's everything.
It's everything.
You could have been at Branson. 65 DVDs, 65 messages from some of the greatest prophetic minds alive today.
I stand corrected, Bob. Now, let's get to our friend L.A. L.A. Marzulli, a hit everywhere he goes, but not just a hit. L.A. is a very godly guy. He's a spirit-filled man who I believe is moved to get the message of prophecy out as few men are. His presentations are laced with drama and humor because that's the kind of guy L.A. is, but they're also deadly serious. And he talked about the cosmic chess match, alien interviews. He talked about alien implants, the mark of the beast, and on and on. And, Bob, people were simply swept away by L.A.'s presentation.
Oh, I don't want to call him the star of the show because he'll get a big head, but seriously, he was the star of the show. Do you know that he spoke 6 times at the conference? 3 messages. He participated in 2 absolutely phenomenal question and answer sessions, an open forum where people could simply ask questions. One of them was on the Nephilim, which was packed to the gills. The other one was on UFOs, and he is an expert in that area.
Yes.
And he even preached our luncheon for us. So when I asked him about it, if this was too overwhelming to him, he looked at me and he said, "Are you crazy? This is what I live for. I love this." So he's a guy that people got to meet, got to shake his hand, got their books autographed, and he's produced this Watcher series, which was a prominent part of the conference. And let's talk about that for a minute, because I think it really is critically important to what he's doing.
Yeah, the Watchers series 1, 2, 3, and 4, which we've carried here at Prophecy in the News, talk about Bible prophecy in terms of electrifying current events. Now, these are things you won't hear in church. In fact, one of the recurrent themes that we heard from our audience at Branson is they would come to me or they'd come to Bob and say, we need to hear this because our pastor in the local church won't touch these subjects at all. Even if we ask him, he changes the subject. So we love it here, and they would tell us we need more of this.
We had quite a few pastors there who were very, very excited to go back and share with their congregations.
Yes.
So it was a success. Now, LA's Watcher series, I don't know what to say about it except it's the weird and the supernatural. I mean, he takes us to UFO locations and actually shows these little glowing orbs landing and taking off. The conspiracy behind the Shroud of Turin, which most people have never heard before. This last one, Watchers 4, he goes to a museum in Texas, and they examine the bones of giants. He goes to Ohio. He's all over the United States touring all these archaeological excavations, proving that what the Bible says in Genesis 6 actually happened.
Yeah.
So fascinating work he's doing. It's a continuing series. It's not over yet.
By the way, one of our top guest speakers was Chuck Missler. You know Chuck Missler in the Koinonia Institute. He's been teaching Bible prophecy for decades, and a very, very intelligent man. His presentation was on the holographic universe. What is reality? What is the spirit world? What is our role in it? Where are we going to be when Jesus returns and takes us to be home with him? What's that going to be like? Well, Chuck Missler, I think, did a terrific job this year.
I know you and your wife, who think at a higher level than the rest of us, were just enamored when you walked out of the auditorium at his message. Chuck came all the way over from New Zealand just for the conference. So we greatly appreciate having men and one of the stalwarts of the prophetic world today, Bill Salas.
You know, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to mention him next. Not long ago, he was here in the Prophecy in the News studio, and we talked about his book, Revelation Road. Bill has a rather unusual way of looking at timed prophecy, very detailed, very interesting.
But his message isn't unusual at all. It's right out of the 38th chapter of Ezekiel. It's right out of the 83rd chapter of Psalms. It's right out of the 17th chapter of Isaiah. There's a war coming in Israel. We see, in fact, by the time this program airs, it could have exploded already. We see the ramping up. We see the activity in Syria and the Middle East. We see this so-called peace process moving to a culmination. And this is what Bill spoke about, you know, these future prophecies that appear to be right over the horizon.
And you know, I talked with Bill, and he was very, very surprised at the level of intensity of our guests at Branson. He said, thanks for inviting me here, because I'm getting to meet all these people who are really excited about Bible prophecy. And he said, this is charging my batteries. He loved it.
He also ran out of books. So
Yes,
next time he'll know better. Everybody wanted to get a copy of Revelation Road because it's a fantastic roadmap to the future events that are happening today. Now, we had one other guy really important at the conference who spoke on some book called Time Travelers of the Bible.
Well, actually, I enjoy speaking about time and time travel. And I actually spoke about the incident that caused me to write the book. I had an encounter with what I believe to be an angelic being in the form of a UFO, and I believe that being saved my life when something went drastically wrong with an airplane I was flying.
And you're not prone to hyperbole, are you?
No.
I mean, you're the most serious guy that I know.
I'm trying to keep this at a low level, but I actually had that kind of an encounter, and I believe that my life was saved. But in that situation, I experienced a time shift, which told me that time is not what we think it is. It's something much more complex. And so I ended up writing a book called Time Travelers of the Bible.
Now, Gary preached a message at the conference that you're going to be able to see eventually on a set of DVDs we're going to offer in a few minutes. But the original message you preached was called The Story I've Never Told.
Yeah.
Well, since you told it once, we couldn't call it the same thing, so we renamed it My Personal UFO Encounter. If you haven't heard it before, it's spectacular. I've got to tell you a funny story real quick about Gary. I'm in the book room, and someone walks up to Gary, and they pick up his Time Travelers of the Bible book, as you can see here, and they asked Gary what it was about. And he hesitated for a second, then he said, well, it's about time. And I looked at him, I said, Gary, it's more than about time. I mean, this is a spectacular, almost 600 pages work of art about men in the Old Testament who traveled forward in time to see the future. This is what Bible prophecy is all about. It's in this book. You have to read this.
And once you see what the Bible says about time, it'll change the way you read Scripture, and I think it'll enhance your reading of Scripture. And I'd like to say more, Bob. I did get my batteries charged too, because when I spoke to the crowd, they were right with me. They were excited, and I'm still excited. Now, in the closing moments here, we're going to tell you how you can get what is at this moment still a project unfinished. I'm holding here a deluxe DVD holder. This is a case without a label. It has a loose leaf binding system in it with, as you can see, blank discs at this point in time. But Bob, this is going to become something much more than a labelless case and a bunch of blank discs.
In about 2 months. We are, Sam Miller, who is our videographer who recorded the conference for us, got back in Charlotte safely with all of the messages in tow. He is furiously at work with an assistant right now, doing all the editing, adjusting the lighting, adjusting the sound. We're working with the graphic designer now to create all of our sleeves and our artwork, probably somewhere around September 15th. Don't hold me to that. I know my wife's going to give me a hard time about putting a date out there, but Sam estimated it would take about 2 months because we have 65 messages to edit. It's a big deal. It's a big job.
There will be Q&A sessions. There will be breakout sessions. There will be live from the bunker sessions with Derek Gilbert. There will be
everything.
Everything. The whole thing that we've been talking about, plus a lot that we haven't had time, even some bonus features featuring the late J.R. Church.
Gary, we didn't mention Noah Hutchings. We didn't mention Larry Spargimino.
That's
we didn't
right.
mention Doug Woodward. We didn't mention Rob Skiba. We didn't mention Steve and Linda Bauer. I mean, there were so many other people at the conference who produced terrific messages that there's going to be a lot more here than you could ever anticipate. Now, that little case Gary is holding, actually, there's going to be 8 of those. And inside that case are 8 beautiful sleeves. Now, if you got the Future Congress sets last year, I know we had a lot of trouble with damage. They were just plastic cases. These are hard shell plastic cases. They have like loose leaf binder inside. There's 8 plastic sheets. Each DVD is going to fit inside that sheet. Terrific, heavy duty. You'll be able to keep those until the rapture happens. So 8 of those DVDs with 8 DVDs in each set. So it's a total of 64 messages and then another bonus DVD that we're going to throw in as a special surprise. But you talked about J.R. Church. For those of you who don't know, J.R. was the founder of our ministry, and he was a dynamic speaker. I mean, like no other. When he went to a conference and gave a presentation, he used a big wraparound screen of 7 panoramic screens and slides, and we're including 8 of J.R.'s conference DVDs from the past in this set.
Now, this is going to be how many DVDs?
64 plus maybe 65.
Wow. So this is a big set, and it's going to be a big feature, and we're going to offer it to you at a very special offer.
$149.95 for all 64 messages, 8 sets, 8 messages on each DVD, $50 off the regular price, $149.95.
We just want you to be able to experience the excitement that we experienced. You know, prophecy is unfolding at a rate that's practically incalculable these days. We live in exciting times. So, keep looking up, everybody, and stay tuned to Prophecy in the News. Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on an audio CD, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on DVD videos. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.